Të nderuar pjesëmarrës. Hajde se mu marrim vesh edhe shef. Besoj se jemi gati që të fillojmë me konferencë. Zonja dhe zotëri, të nderuar pjesëmarrës. Kam kënaqësi të veçantë që në emër të bordit të Institutit Riinvest të shpallit të hapur konferencën ndërkombëtare jubilare aktivizimi i burimeve të zhvillimit ekonomik. Të nderuar pjesëmarrës të institucioneve, përfaqësues të Komisionit Evropian, përfaqësues të ambasadave të akredituara në Prishtinë, përfaqësues të organizatave ndërkombëtare, faleminderit për mbështetjen e vazhdueshme në punën tonë. Përshëndes edhe përfaqësues të institucioneve akademike, përfaqësues bizneseve, bashkëpunëtor, media dhe të gjithë të pranishmit. Ju falenderoj për mbështetjen tuaj dhe që na jeni bashkuar me ne sot për të festuar së bashku 30 vite të punës sonë në atmosferë pune me këtë konferencë që do të pason e që të trajton atë që përbën esencën e shqetësimit të Institutit Riinvest gjatë këtyre 3 dekadave dhe atë që të bëj edhe më tutje në realizimin e misionit të tij që të promovoj zhvillimin e shëndrueshëm të Kosovës që nëpërmjet studimeve promovoj zhvillimin e qëndrueshëm ekonomik të Kosovës edhe nëpërmjet dijeve të reja dhe studimeve cilësore. Përkraja juaj na ka motivuar vazhdimisht që përkundër sfidave të arrijmë suksese në këtë rrugtim 30 vjeçar me tërë këtë fond të projekteve hulumtuese, studimeve, analizave dhe rekomandimeve për avancimin e politikave ekonomike që të vjenë në favor të zhvillimit të ekonomisë Kosovës, si mas standardeve të avancuara të ekonomisë të tregut të hapur. Faleminderit menaxhment dhe stafi i Riinvestit, të Institutit Riinvest për përkushtim ndaj punës, për përkushtim ndaj misionit të institutit. Faleminderit për kontribut dhe që keni qenë pjesë e jona në periodat të caktuara. Falenderoj edhe themeluesit, antarë të Këshillit Shkencor dhe menaxhmentin dhe të gjithë ata që punojnë sot dhe që kanë punuar në Institutin Riinvest gjatë kësaj kohe. Lejoni që në vijim të qëllës që ta ndjekim një film të shkurt dokumentari cili bën fjalë për rrugtimin e Institutit Riinvest bashkë me juve gjatë këtyre 3 dekadave. Faleminderit për vëmendje, punë të mbarë konferencës.
kthyer qendrën e Kosovës në situatën kur vetëm shpresa dhe rezistenca aktive paqësore kundër gjendjes së rënd okupuese e servisonte mbijetesën, në muajt e parë të vitit 1995 nisi të duke një rrezë shprese se Kosova ka potencialet dhe mundësitë për një ekonomi të qëndrueshme në kushtet e lirisë e pavarësisë. Ky është rrëfimi për Institutin Riinvest, një institut i lindur në kontekstin e luftës për liri e pavarësi, i dedikuar për zhvillimin e qëndrueshëm dhe prosperitetin ekonomik të Kosovës, promovim të paqes dhe bashkëpunimit. Të udhëhequr nga profesori Mohamed Mustafa, një grup i intelektualëve dhe ekonomistëve u bashkuan më 15 maj 1995 që të themelojnë Institutin Riinvest. Ata përcaktuan një mision të qartë: promovimi i mendimit të avancuar ekonomik dhe mbështetja e zhvillimit modern ekonomik të Kosovës, bazuar në filozofinë e ndërmarrësisë. Në proceset e shpërbërjes me luftat të përgjakshme të ish-Jugosllavisë Federale, regjimi serb kishte ripushtuar Kosovën duke zhbërë autonominë dhe strukturën e saj institucionale, duke e vënë atë nën subordinim të pushtetit serb, i cili kishte instaluar një regjim apartheidi dhe një politikë koloniale. Në opinion botror dhe në analizat politike të asaj kohe, çështja e Kosovës shtrohej më shumë si një çështje separatizmi në njërin anë dhe e të drejtave njerëzore në anën tjetër. E Kosova ishte në fakt edhe një koloni në Evropë, dhe kjo duhej dokumentuar me studime racionale të argumentuara ekonomike dhe politike.
Filozofisë politike nga e cila kishte lindur projekti për pavarësinë e Kosovës i mungonte një lloj inxhinieringu ekonomik, i cili ishte i domosdoshëm procesin e sqarimit dhe ndërtimit të një shoqërie prosperuese në kuadër të një ekonomie të hapur të tregut dhe integrimeve euroatlantike dhe të bashkëpunimit rajonal. Përkundër një situate të vështirë që ndodhej Kosova atëherë, ne ishim thellë të motivuar dhe të bindur se kërkime shkencore dhe fuqia e dijes e bazuar në to do të duhej të bashkohemi për pjekjet e gjithëmbarshme për liri dhe të mbështesë ato për të hapur perspektivat e një të ardhmje dinjitoze edhe për qytetarët e Kosovës. Në fillet e para të institutit u iniciuan aktivitetet përbashkëta me lidhjen e ekonomistëve të Kosovës dhe komunitetin e biznesit privat, pa financim të rregull dhe me kontributet tona personale. Megjithatë, diku ka mesi vitit 1996, ne përgatitëm një propozim për National Endowment for Democracy, përkatësisht për Center for International Private Enterprises në Washington, dhe kjo është në një pikë thesi. Me projektin të aprobuar Sparing nga Cajpe dhe pastaj i zbatuar dhe në shtetin e Free Diversity në Gjermani, Open Society në Budapest, projekti aktivitet ekonomike dhe zhvillimi demokratik i zbatuar në 1997 dhe 1998 ofroi të gjitha argumentet për mundësinë që Kosova ndërtoi qëndrueshmërinë e saj ekonomike dhe pavarësinë e saj ekonomike. Veç kësaj, ky projekt përvijoi edhe çastin e ndërtimit pas luftës në reformat ekonomike, vizionin zhvillimor që i duhej Kosovës në kushtet të ndërtimit, ekonomisë së tregut dhe zhvillimit sektorit privat. Ky projekt mori vëmendjen e duhur të faktorëve kyç ndërkombëtar, kontriboi inkorporimit dhe formësimit qëndrimeve politike rreth Kosovës. Për statusin e Kosovës në Rambuje, e po ashtu edhe pas luftës, delegacioni i Kosovës u mbështet në dhënat e këtij projekti. Ky projekt ndikoi po ashtu edhe në formësimin e qëndrimeve të faktorit ndërkombëtar për Kosovën para dhe pas luftës.
It's a very different time in Kosovo when I was approached by Mohamed Mustafa and his staff to see if SIPE could work with them on what really was the first project of its kind to study the private sector in Kosovo, its nature, its scale, and how it operated. And what was so remarkable about the program was not only that this was the first time this had been done, was that there were no statistics available in the region due to neglect by the current government at the time. The other remarkable thing about this was the level of volunteering that went into this project. The number of people who gave time and effort and talent to putting together what really was a groundbreaking report on the scale and size of the private sector. What it recommended throughout its time was a stress not only on the need for a market that supported small and medium enterprise development, but also democracy that was going to be a prerequisite for the development of the private sector in Kosovo, as well as the need to develop the human skills of the people of Kosovo. And if I look at the Riinvest Institute's work today, much of those early findings are still relevant and they're still in practice. Riinvest's work still calls for a democratic and market-driven society in Kosovo. It still calls for building the human capacity of its people. When I first started at SIPE, my executive director, John Sullivan, who was running SIPE at the time when we first worked with Riinvest, always believed there were three key things to the success of an organization. One was its intellectual integrity, the quality of its thinking, and how consistent that thinking was through its work. Two was a commitment to excellence, making sure that no matter what you produce is always of the highest quality, so people can use it for reference. And number three is the need to pass on your knowledge. We call it passing it on. And I think in all three of those categories, if you look at Riinvest's body of work, all three categories are met. And that's why Riinvest has been so successful over the years, and why we've always been so proud to partner with Riinvest in its work.
Suksesi I shpejt në projektin Center for International Private Enterprises, National Endowment Democracy, I hapi mundësi të reja Institutit Riinvest. Lufta midis UÇK-s dhe forcave të regjimit serb erdhi duke u ashpërsuar, andaj NATO intervenoi për të ndaluar katastrofën humanitare. Edhe Instituti Riinvest ndau fatin e rreth 70% të popullsisë së Kosovës të dëpërtuar dhe u detyrua dhunshëm të zhvendosej. Megjithatë, Riinvest formoi shpejt një zyrë në Tetov, vuri kontaktet me partnerët e tij dhe shpejt vazhdoi punën në projektet e reja. As këto ngjarje dramatike nuk e ndalën angazhimin e institutit për ardhmërinë ekonomike të Kosovës.
Në pranverën e vitit 1999, të përfshirë nga lufta, për 3 muaj vazhduam punën në Tetov, në Maqedoninë e Veriut, me besim të fortë se liria po vente, dhe se po hapej një faqe re historisë së Kosovës, ku zhvillimi ekonomik do të ishte një nga çështjet më të rëndësishme. Në zyrën që hapëm në Tetov, filluam të zhvillojmë idetë mbi politikat dhe strategjitë e rindërtimit të pas luftës, reformat e nevojshme për të zhvilluar ekonominë e tregut. Ne po shihnim një botë të tërë mundësish dhe oportunitetesh për Kosovën në liri.
Duhej konstatuar pasojat e luftës dhe dizajnuar politika dhe strategji që paralelisht me evitimin e pasojave të rënda të luftës, sidomos në pronën dhe pasurinë private, fondin e banimit dhe ekonomitë familjare. Në këtë fazë, Riinvesti bëri hulumtimet e gjëra dhe ekstenzive me mbështetjen e Department for International Development në terren lidhur me dëmet në ekonomitë familjare dhe një studim tjetër me pasojat në bizneset private e që dhanë rezultate domethënëse. Veç kësaj, u angazhuan 17 ekipe të ekspertëve për të vlerësuar gjendjen dhe për të propozuar intervenimet prioritare në sektor të ndryshëm të ekonomisë dhe shoqërisë. Në fillim të vitit 2000, Instituti Riinvest organizoi një konferencë impresive ndërkombëtare me 200 pjesëmarrës, me ekspertë ndërkombëtar nga Bashkimi Evropian dhe Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës, administratës ndërkombëtare dhe nga qarqet politike, akademike dhe të shoqërisë civile të Kosovës. Vlen të theksohet se këto studime kanë ngel thuaja të vetmet dhe me një vlerë të madhe historike. Në këtë konferencë, Riinvesti prezantoi rezultatet e hulumtimeve gjithëpërfshirëse mbi pasojat e luftës, si dhe rekomandimet lidhur me politikat dhe strategjitë, jo vetëm për evitimin e dëmeve të mëdha fizike, por edhe për politikat ekonomike që do të duhej të zbatoheshin për një zhvillim të qëndrueshëm. Ky ishte një rast i mirë që Riinvesti të dëshmoj kapacitetet e tij, por edhe të afirmoj përkushtimin e tij për të marrë me aspektet më vitale të ndërtimit të një shoqërie prosperuese.
It was in July 1999, only a few weeks after the end of the NATO intervention in Kosovo, that Riinvest and the Ebert Foundation cooperated in a first conference on the future of state and economy in Kosovo. And since then, Riinvest has become a center of expertise and consultancy for the development of the young state and its society.
Hulumtimet e Riinvestit kanë qenë gjithmonë të ndërlidhura me nevojat prioritare të Kosovës. Në vitin 2000-2009 janë realizuar aktivitete vëllimore kërkimore të shumtën me rol prej pioneri që veçmas u mbështetën nga projekti i realizuar me mbështetje të USAID-it dhe në bashkëpunim me Center for International Private Enterprises, promovimi i zhvillimit ekonomik nëpërmjet të shoqërisë civile. Në kuadër të këtij projekti, Riinvesti realizoi një seri prej 20 studimesh e raportesh mbi reformat ekonomike që përfshinin një spektër çështjesh të lidhura me ndërtimin e ekonomisë së tregut, si transformimi i pronës shoqërore dhe privatizimi, zhvillimi i ndërmarrjeve të vogla dhe të mesme dhe ndërmarrësisë, sistemi i pensioneve, politikat për një buxhet të qëndrueshëm e transparent, politikat fiskale, ndërtimi i sistemit tatimor, investimet e jashtme, politikat tregtare dhe promovimi i eksportit, tregu i punës dhe papunësia, sistemi i edukimit dhe zhvillimi ekonomik, bujqësia dhe zhvillimi rural, diaspora dhe politikat e migrimit, formësimi i bazës kërkimore për strategjinë e zhvillimit të energjisë, planit hapësinor, planit nacional të zhvillimit.
I had the distinct honor and privilege of collaborating with Riinvest during the 1999 to 2002 period when I served as USAID's senior economist in Kosovo. USAID supported Riinvest during this historic period of political and economic transition for the Kosovar people. During that crucial time in Kosovo's journey to political independence and economic recovery, Riinvest served as a bulwark of independent research and thought-provoking advice on how best to ensure that Kosovo would emerge successfully from the terrible crisis it had endured during the 1990s and establish the economic and policy preconditions needed to promote a prosperous future for all of Kosovo's citizens. And Riinvest has continued since to promote Kosovo's ongoing advancement as a proud, independent state with an expanding market-based economy.
Në këtë periudhë, Riinvesti kishte rolin e një lloj katalizatori për të prezantuar inpute autentike kosovare, karshi administratës ndërkombëtare dhe nganjëherë edhe shfaqej si një opozit për të avancuar politikat dhe reformat ekonomike.
Is the best known Kosovar institution.
Ka vendosur të dekorojnë me medaljen e artë të pavarësisë Institutin Riinvest. Faleminderit. Në vijim të angazhimit tonë për të kontribuar në çështjet vitale të ndërtimit të shtetit të Kosovës, Institutit Riinvest i lesohet formimi dhe menaxhimi i grupit të ekspertëve për ekonomi dhe financa, për të mbështetur ekipin e Unitetit të Kosovës në negociatat e Vjenës për statusin përfundimtar të Kosovës. Në kuadër të këtij grupi, përveç stafit tonë hulumtues, angazhohemi edhe rreth 50 ekspertë vendor dhe ndërkombëtar, duke përfshirë profesor Isa Mustafen, Ilaza Amajrin dhe profesorin e ndjerë Ekrem Beshirin. Fjalia kruciale në planin gjithëpërfshirës të aftisarjes së gjithë prona brenda kufijve të Kosovës dhe dakon popullit të Kosovës ishte mbështetur në argumentet bazuara në studimet e Institutit Riinvest, një lloj si edhe argumentimet për ndarjen e llogarive në Serbinë sipas parimit të suksesionit pastaj studimin bën të luftës dhe ato të qeverisë së vërshme serbe gjatë viteve të 90-s që vlerësohen rreth $22 miliardë amerikan. Ekspertët e grupit për ekonomi dhe financa, përveçur nga profesor Mohamed Mustafa, kanë marrë pjesë në 2 raunde të bisedimeve të vjedhjes dhe kanë prezantuar argumentet për subjektivitetin e plotë të Kosovës në kuadër të Federatës Jugosllave dhe me sukses i kanë mbrojtur kërkesat e palës kosovare duke hedhur poshtë pretendimet serbe mbi pronën shoqërore dhe publike të Kosovës.
Fondi i studimeve të Institutit Riinvest ka ardhur vazhdimisht duke u pasuruar dhe është në fakt një kontribut substancial jo vetëm për politikat e bazuar në evidencë në vendin tonë, por edhe për zhvillimin e mendimit ekonomik në Kosovë. Studimet e përmendura krijuan bazën solide në të cilën ne vazhdojmë kërkimet tona edhe tani, duke i pasuruar edhe me çështje tjera si qeverisja korporative, ndërmarrjet publike, prokurimin publik, zhvillimi ekonomik lokal, monitorimi i mjedisit biznesor, hartimi i strategjisë së industrisë së Kosovës dhe strategjisë së energjisë, monitorimi i mjedisit biznesor dhe zhvillimi i sektorit privat dhe kontributi përmes konferencës ndërkombëtare, aktivizimi i burimeve të rritjes ekonomike në Kosovë, si dhe mbështetje e vazhdueshme për forumin 2015 me fokus në integrimet euroatlanike. Një tjetër fokus i yni është fuqizimi ekonomik i grave, ku Riinvest ka marrë rolin koordinues të forumit ekonomik grave, një platformë gjithëpërfshirëse që angazhon aktorët kyç në nivel politik dhe institucional për barazi ekonomike. Kjo qasje gjerë tematike na lejon të trajtojmë sfidat zhvillimore në mënyrë të ndërlidhur dhe me ndikim afatgjatë. Kontribut të rëndësishëm në zhvillimin e Institutit Riinvest në këtë periudhë kanë dhënë drejtorët ekzekutiv Mohamed Sadiku dhe Lumir Abdigjiku.
Janë më shumë se 2 dekada bashkëpunimit ngushtë ndërmjet Fondacionit për Shoqëritë të Hapur dhe Institutit Riinvest. Që në fillim, ky nuk ishte thjesht një bashkëpunim, por ishte një partneritet i ndërtuar mbi një respekt të ndërsjellë dhe vizion të përbashkët që kishim për Kosovën. Ky partneritet u fuqizua edhe më tutje kur së bashku e iniciuam dhe themeluam platformën avokuese Forum 2015, një projekt që Instituti Riinvest vazhdon të udhëheqë me përkushtim edhe sot i kësaj dite. Në periudhën e pas luftës, realizuam bashkë shumë projekte afatgjata, avokuam për zgjidhjen e sfidave zhvillimore dhe patëm guximin të sfidonim proceset ndjeshme edhe në nivel ndërkombëtar. Fushatën tonë nisëm me ciklin avokues pse pavarësi për Kosovën, duke lobuar për njohjen e saj në botën arabe në rend parë edhe te 5 shtetet mos njohëse të Bashkimit Evropian. Ajo që e mbajti të fortë këtë rrugtim të përbashkët ishte ekspertiza profesionale e thellë dhe pjekuria e Institutit Riinvest, që kishte në çdo hap të veprimit të saj dhe gjithmonë në funksion të ofrimit të zgjidhjeve më të mira për të ardhmen e Kosovës.
Instituti Riinvest e siguroi qëndrueshmërinë organizative e financiare edhe ndaj misionit të tij, duke i dhënë një prioritet të theksuar shkollimit dhe zhvillimit të vazhdueshëm profesional dhe akademik të stafit të tij dhe më gjerë, duke kontribuar në krijimin e një mase kritike të ekspertëve për fushën e ekonomisë, ndërmarrësisë dhe menaxhmentit. Në qendër të punës së tij, Instituti Riinvest gjithnjë e mbajti investimin në kapitalin njerëzor për të krijuar diferencë në mendimin ekonomik në Kosovë. Nëpërmjet partneriteteve të tij, sikurse Universitetin e Staffordshire të Britanisë së Madhe, Universitetit të Anconës në Itali dhe programeve të franshizuara në Kosovë në Kolegjin Riinvest, instituti në bashkëpunim me Open Society Institute Chiving Foundation kanë mbështetur kryerjen e studimeve master dhe të PhD nga fusha e ekonomisë dhe menaxhimit të biznesit për rreth 200 të rinj. Ata sot punojnë me Institutin Riinvest në punë të rregullt ose si bashkëpunëtor të jashtëm, por gjithsesi shumica e tyre japin kontributin e vlefshëm në universitetet publike dhe private të Kosovës, institucionet qeveritare, institucionet financiare, si dhe në kompanitë e ndryshme private e publike. Padyshim që kjo masë e ekspertëve ka ndikuar në zhvillimin e mendimit të avancuar ekonomik dhe zhvillimin e ndërmarrësisë në Kosovë.
I have been associated with Riinvest Institute since 1998 through cooperating in research and policy analysis and facilitating their collaboration with Staffordshire University, offering the university's degrees in Kosovo and also through a major scholarship program funded by Staffordshire University and Open Society Foundation. over 70 young Kosovar scholars completed master's and PhD degrees in economics, and all of whom have returned to Kosovo. Over the past 30 years, Riinvest has been transformed to a leading think tank and research institution with well-educated staff, with expertise at international level, engaged in a wide variety of research projects and policy analysis. Riinvest has been a training ground for academics, researchers, and policymakers. While at Riinvest, they were encouraged and supported to continue their education towards master's and PhD degrees abroad. Most of these scholars are now contributing in teaching, research, and executive positions and political institutions and structures in Kosovo.
Instituti Riinvest, që nga themelimi 30 vite më parë, ka qenë një think tank I rëndësisë së veçantë në Kosovë, por edhe më gjerë, duke ofruar ulëmtime ekonomike dhe dhënë rekomandime për politikat ekonomike në funksion të promovimit të ekonomisë së tregut bazuar në filozofinë ndërmarrësisë. Si instituti I parë I kësaj natyre, në udhëheqjen e profesor Muhammet Mustafa, e më pas edhe të ekonomistëve e ekipeve më të mira në vend, Riinvest kishte një rol të veçantë edhe në formësimin e politikbërjes, edukimin dhe zhvillimin e shoqërisë civile në përgjithësi, në promovimin e qëndrueshmërisë ekonomike dhe zhvillimin e qëndrueshëm demokratik të vendit. Si kontribut I veçantë I institutit duhet nënvizuar edukimin e gjeneratave të reja të ekonomistëve, sidomos bashkëpunimi me Universitetin Stavanger, ku një gjenerate të tërë ekonomistëve me titull shkencore kredenciale ndërkombëtare kontribuan të ishin barës të zhvillimeve ekonomike, politike e sociale në vend.
Edhe sot, Riinvesti vazhdon të mbetet një zë shumë I angazhuar dhe I paanshëm I respektuar për zhvillimin ekonomik si në vend ashtu edhe ndërkombëtarisht. Me aprovimin e planit të ri strategjik, Instituti Riinvest ka hyrë në një fazë të re zhvillimore e cila karakterizohet me ndërkombëtarizimin e aktiviteteve të tij, rritjen e profilit të tij kërkimor, forcimin e partneritetit me institute dhe organizata kërkimore më prestigjioze në Bashkimin Evropian, Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës dhe më gjerë. Në këtë plan, prioritetet kërkimore janë zhvillimi I qëndrueshëm dhe rritja cilësore ekonomike, transformimi I gjelbër dhe ai digital, ndërtimi I një ekonomie konkurruese dhe konvergjente me atë të BE-s, përdorimi I përgjithshëm I burimeve natyrore dhe mbrojtja e mjedisit. Me ulëmtimet e tij viteve të fundit, ka eksploruar dhe argumentuar domosdoshmërinë e ndryshimit të modelit të rritjes ekonomike dhe kjo sot përbën një nga preokupimet kryesore të ekipit ton. Instituti Riinvest tani më është pjesë e partneriteteve ndërkombëtare për realizimin e projekteve në Horizon Europe, në World Economic Forum dhe organizon forumin e tij ekonomik vjetor që po zhvillohet në platformën më të rëndësishme të debatit të angazhuar për zhvillimin ekonomik të vendit tonë.
Instituti Riinvest sot është shumë mirë I pozicionuar për të kontribuar në debatet strategjike për zhvillimin ekonomik të Kosovës. Si lider I studimeve zhvillimore në vend, ne kemi ndërtuar partneritete të qëndrueshme me institucione prestigjioze në Bashkimin Evropian dhe më gjerë, duke na mundësuar të realizojmë projekte të standardeve të larta ndërkombëtare. Përmes kësaj qasje, ne jemi duke ndërkombëtarizuar jo vetëm produktet dhe shërbimet tona kërkimore, por edhe mënyrën se si prodhojmë dhe shpërndajmë dijen në funksion të zhvillimit. Fusha tematike që mbulon sot Instituti Riinvest janë ndër më strategjike për të ardhmen e vendit dhe janë në linjë me prioritetet e hapësirës evropiane të kërkimit dhe drejtimet kryesore të programeve kornizë të Bashkimit Evropian. Për secilin nga këto fusha, ne kemi zhvilluar projekte konkrete dhe platforma të qëndrueshme. Si fjala vjen, Forumin Ekonomik Vjetor për të trajtuar çështjet e zhvillimit të qëndrueshëm ekonomik, hapësirën e veprimit të gjelbërt për tranzicionin e gjelbërt, si dhe përfshirjen tonë në programet kornizë për forcimin e kapaciteteve në kërkim dhe inovacion. Instituti Riinvest është gjithashtu një agjenci prodhuese të dhënave me kontribut origjinal që ndihmojnë vendimarrjen publike dhe analizat krahasuese ndërkombëtare. Në këtë drejtim, Riinvest është institucion partner I Forumit Ekonomik Botëror duke kontribuar me dhëna dhe analiza për raporte ndërkombëtare mbi konkurrueshmërinë dhe zhvillimin ekonomik.
Today, I'm sending my best regards and congratulations to our colleagues from Riinvest Institute, who are a driving force in Kosovo's research and innovation landscape, as well as in our joint Horizon Europe-funded project, Policy Answers. Riinvest's expertise and dedication have been invaluable in advancing research and innovation and issues such as health policy, green and digital transformation in Kosovo and across the Western Balkans.
Most of those 30 years, I was personally a witness to the excellent work that Riinvest is doing, and the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies is extremely proud that we have been most of this time very close partners in projects, in the organization of events. And I remember personally my first contact was with Mohammed Mustafa in 2001 in a joint project, Global Development Network for Southeast Europe. And he was writing with colleagues from his team a paper on the prospects for economic development in Kosovo, in the regional context. And the situation back in 2001 was obviously a very difficult one, more than 50% unemployment rate. And Kosovo has developed ever since, and unemployment rates are now single digit, and also Riinvest has developed a lot with the country.
Duke shikuar rrugën e Institutit Riinvest për këto 3 dekada, unë dhe bashkëthemeluesit e institutit mund të jemi krenar për rritjet në përmbushjen e misionit dhe kontributin e rëndësishëm për zhvillimin e Kosovës. Ky është një themel I fortë për dekadat e ardhshme që të thellohen veçoritë që dallojnë Institutin Riinvest për konsekvencën, për mendimin e avancuar e inovativ, të pavarur e të besueshëm për të avancuar për her kapacitetet e tij konkurruese si në vend ashtu në rrafshin global.
On behalf of the board of directors of SIPE, myself and our staff, I'd love to extend hearty congratulations to Riinvest, its board of directors, its staff, and its stakeholders on this very great anniversary.
Happy anniversary, Riinvest.
Congratulations to your 30th anniversary. It is a pleasure having met and cooperated with you.
So let me once again congratulate to 30 years of excellent work.
With congratulations to 30 years of excellence, leadership, and impact.
That I'd like to again salute the Riinvest team and Mohammed Mustafa personally for your historic contributions to building a resilient, prosperous, and peaceful future for the Kosovo people. Thank you all very much.
Okay, I will continue in Albania, so if you can put your headphones back on. Thank you. I'll be brief, jemi shkurt. Të nderuar përfaqësues të institucioneve publike, misionet diplomatike, përfaqësues të organizatave vendore ndërkombëtare, përfaqësues mediave, miq të Institutit Riinvest, zonja dhe zotëri. Kam kënaqësinë e veçantë që sot në emër të Institutit Riinvest qyroj misardhjen në këtë konferencë që shënon 30 vjetorin. Pas dokumentarit që sapo e ndoqëm, fjalimi im sigurisht bëhet më I shkurt, po jo më I lehtë, shumë nga momentjet dhe arritjet kryesore të Institutit Riinvest, si dhe njerëzit që duhet falënderuar, vetë se janë përmendur aty, dhe që më lejon mu të fokusohem në qëllimin e kësaj konference. Konferenca sotme jubilare titullohet Aktivizimi i burimeve të rritjes ekonomike. Në mënyrë vetë shpjeguese, ky titull tregon se fokusi është në burimet e rritjes ekonomike dhe synon që të nxjesë diskutime lidhur me mundësitë se si mund të përshpejtohet ritmi i rritjes ekonomike në Kosovë. Me pjesëmarrjen e ekspertëve të njohur nga vendi, rajoni dhe bota, kjo konferencë synon të krijojë një platformë pastër për shkëmbim idesh dhe për të ofruar rekomandime praktike që përmirësojnë politikat publike. Dita e sotme e konferencës është ndarë në 3 sesione. Në sesionin e parë do diskutojmë pak për rikëtimin ekonomik të Kosovës, një reflektim mbi tranzicionin, qëndrueshmërinë, si dhe rrugë përpara për rritje të më të tjeshme. Në sesionin e dytë do diskutojmë lidhur me perspektiva ndërkombëtare të transformimit ekonomik, përfshirë kontekstin e integrimeve evropiane. Ndërsa në sesionin e tretë do të flasim për cilësinë e institucioneve dhe ndikimin e tyre në zhvillim ekonomik. Sesionit parë do t'i parapri një prezantim i një raporti të Institutit Riinvest që synon që të shërbejë si bazë për diskutim në panelet e konferencës dhe më pas do të kemi mundësi që nga panelistët e nderuar të kemi refleksione mbi këto tema nga këndvështrime të ndryshme, sigurisht edhe nga aspekte tjera në kuadër të fushave që ata mbulojnë si ulëmtues apo si bartës të funksioneve të caktuara. Nesër do të kemi prezantime të punimeve shkencore të studiuesve vendore ndërkombëtar në 4 panele të ndryshme. Temat e trajtuara në këto sesione janë të rëndësisë të veçantë për zhvillimin e Kosovës, mirëpo ato nuk e trajtojnë vetëm kontekstin e Kosovës, trajtojnë edhe kontekstin e vendeve të tjera, e ne besojmë që kjo do të mund të nxjerrë rekomandime në mënyrë krahasimtare. Më lejoni pra t'i falenderoj panelistët, prezantuesit, komentuesit në këtë konferencë. Dëshiroj gjithashtu që shfrytëzoj rastin për të falendëruar gjithë partnerët që na kanë mbështetur në vimësi gjatë këtyre 3 dekadave, që kontributi juaj ka qenë i rëndësishëm në rrugtimin tonë. Gjithashtu sot dëshiroj të falenderoj në mënyrë të veçantë edhe stafin tonë, i cilët në mënyrë të përkushtuar e kryjnë punën dhe vazhdojnë të i mbesin besnik misionit të Institutit Riinvest. Falenderoj gjithashtu sponsorët që mbështesin këtë konferencë, Bankën TEB dhe Economic Fundamentals Initiative. Mbështetja atyre ka qenë e rëndësishme për organizimin e kësaj konference. Dua gjithashtu të theksoj se diskutimet përjashto këtë pjesën e fjalëve hyrëse do të zhvillohet në anglisht, megjithatë është në dispozicion për kthimi për gjithë ata që kanë nevojë. Në mediat sociale kjo konferencë përsillet me hashtagun Riinvest30 dhe ju inkurajoj që ndani mendimet tuaj për të zgjeruar këtë diskutim. Tani, për të filluar pjesën e parë të programit, kam kënaqësinë të veçantë të jap fjalën të ngarkuarës me punë të ambasadës së Shtetit Bashkuar në Kosovë, zonjës Anu Pratipati, për një fjalë hyrëse.
Good morning, Mirmenjes. First of all, let me start out by saying that was a very inspiring documentary we just saw, and I think that documentary that shows the successes and the opportunities in the development of the last 30 years is going to set for you over these next 2 days the perfect framework for your discussions and your talks. And it will give you, I think, all the inspiration to set up and stand up for the next 30 years as well. So I'm very happy and very honored to join you today in celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Riinvest Institute. Let me also thank the organizers and also Sadie, who I just met today, and also to Alban Haneshi and other distinguished guests that are here today. On behalf of the U.S. Embassy, I want to extend our warmest congratulations on this extraordinary milestone. For 3 decades, Riinvest has been a pioneer in socioeconomic research, policy analysis, and public discourse in Kosovo. Your work has informed decision makers, empowered civil society, and contributed significantly to Kosovo's democratic and economic development. From your earliest years, starting with your first partnership with Washington, D.C.-based Center for Private Enterprise, for the Center for International Private Enterprise, Riinvest has laid the foundation for data-driven policy and strong private sector advocacy in Kosovo. That early collaboration was not only a critical moment for the Institute, but a meaningful chapter on the ongoing friendship between the people of Kosovo and the United States. Today, your rigorous publications on issues ranging from employment and corporate governance to energy, transparency, and diaspora remittances are used by government institutions, international organizations, and business associations alike. You've truly become a cornerstone for evidence-based policymaking in this country. This 30-year legacy echoes a core priority of our own mission: promoting Kosovo's economic, regional integration and empowering the private sector. Your work, supported over the years by various U.S. government-funded programs, has made Kosovo more stable, transparent, and prosperous. This not only strengthens Kosovo's democracy, but also contributes greatly to global security and prosperity, which in turn makes the United States stronger, safer, and more prosperous itself. I'd like to highlight just a few examples that illustrate this impact and the impact of this organization. The Public Procurement Barometer, or the X Index, developed with U.S. support, has pushed municipalities throughout Kosovo to increase transparency, competition, and efficiency. Likewise, the Municipal Competitive Index has helped reduce barriers for private sector and assisted local governments in establishing sound business environments. We also recognize Riinvest's role in founding Riinvest College, which stands as a testament to the Institute's commitment to education and capacity building. These efforts are not just local achievements. They reflect the shared values and shared vision for the future. Thanks to Riinvest, Kosovo is well positioned to increase trade and investment opportunities, including through strengthened partnerships with the United States businesses, which is, as you know, one of our priorities for the U.S. Embassy. Finally, I want to note that 15 years ago, Riinvest brought together local and international voices at Activating the Sources of Economic Growth in Kosovo conference. The U.S. ambassador at the time, Christopher Dell, served as the keynote speaker. I'm honored to follow in his footsteps today and sharing with you to reaffirm our enduring partnership. Congratulations again on this impressive anniversary. We're proud to be your partner and look forward to the many milestones yet to come. I'm confident in the next 5-year anniversary, 10 years, that the U.S. Embassy will be still a strong partner of Riinvest, and I'm looking forward to continuing the work that we do with all of you. Thank you all today, and I wish you best success in the conference in the coming days.
Faleminderit zonja për debate. Më lejoni tani të ftoj zonjën Ana Karin Platon, shefe e seksionit politik në zyrën e BE-s, për ndarë mendimet e saj me ne.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me here on this big milestone, I would say. And I would like to start with congratulate you on your 30th anniversary, and also congratulate you to all the things that you have achieved so far and the contributions of Riinvest throughout the years. We have seen in this interesting documentary how vital you have been for the development of Kosovo, but today you also contribute to the constructive debate on socioeconomic developments and challenges in Kosovo. You have also, as was mentioned briefly in the documentary here also, you have also successfully implemented the Horizon Europe project, Policy Answers, which is aiming to empower the research community and more broadly provide support to Kosovo authorities in the research and industry policy making and implementation. Today, I think it is significantly clear in the uncertain political and economic environment that we are operating in today, how important it is that our economies will develop the resilience and sustainability. Kosovo has potential. It has shown resilience in the latest years. Despite a very complex past, Economic growth have been steadily over 4% annually. However, Kosovo has started from a low level in the sense that, and is still living with the complexities and the challenges of the past. Structural challenges still need to be addressed, maybe more important than ever. Invest in human capital and education reforms are still very necessary. Support the research and innovation in businesses, also very necessary. We have seen some inspiring examples in Kosovo. I think it's also necessary to come together and jointly form a national long-term strategy on how to develop Kosovo's potential and competitiveness. We need to address the high inactivity rates in Kosovo. There has been some progress the latest years in actually formalizing the economy, but there is still a long way to go. The environmental issues need to be addressed, more acute than ever, I would say. They have big health and financial costs to the citizens. And I would also dare to say that it's one of the factors that actually makes investing in Kosovo less attractive. There is a very important role for the private sector also when it comes to addressing sustainability issues. The private sector needs to ensure that its growth is also healthy by incorporating social responsibility approaches, and to attract qualified staff, retain them by giving good and sustainable jobs. And also to be a positive part of society when it comes to developing sustainability issues. The European Union is aligned to all these objectives, and we are trying to help in reforming business environment in Kosovo, and we are still Kosovo's largest investment and trade partner. We have made financial assistance available to Kosovo to make Kosovo more competitive, investment attractive, and to make Kosovo able to create more jobs. We are engaging with authorities for moving forward with the EU growth plan, as accelerating accession processes. We have agreed with the government of Kosovo for specific reforms across vital pillars of economy, judiciary and public administration, and good governance, as we have done with the rest of the Western Balkan 6. A very important part of the growth plan is also the faster integration into the single market. And there the EU also has a lot of work to do. Some examples in this field is, for instance, SEPA and the green transport lanes, but there are many more areas that we can work on jointly with Kosovo and Western Balkan 6, and we will in the coming years. We are, for instance, integrating the Western Balkan 6 into the EU Single Market Programme. Very important for Kosovo and Kosovo businesses to take this huge opportunity, which can give them tools to strengthen the governance of the internal market, supporting competitiveness of industry, and in particular for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Our joint focus is to support on the longer-term socioeconomic recovery of the region, its economic convergence with the EU. There is still a big gap in terms of economic development between the region and the EU, and the faster we close this gap, the faster we start creating resilient, strong and sustainable market economies. And we all have a role to play in this. Thank you very much.
Faleminderit zonja Platon. Tani lejoni t'i kaloj S'ta vetëm profesorit Mohamed që të moderoj sesionin e parë të konferencës. Ju falenderit.
Mirë mëngjesi, gjithve. Më lejoni që tu përshëndes gjithve edhe një herë, në emër të themeluesve. Ne tash po kalojmë në një atmosferë punuese, por nuk jemi tërësisht e liruar nga emocionet. Kështu që kërkojmë falje për një emocion të tepruar. Paneli parë ka titullin Rrugtimi ekonomik i Kosovës, do me thonë, refleksione mbi tranzicionin shumë të vështirë ekonomik, konsolidimin e këtij tranzicioni, por problemi i Kosovës është që ngel për një kohë të gjatë në tranzicion. Edhe ka probleme që të ndërtojë një model i cili do t'i përballonte nevojat shumë të mëdha të Kosovës për të ngritur nivelin e rritjes ekonomike. Do me thonë, këtu tash e shohim në këtë panel, dëshiroj të fokusoj pak a shumë debatin tonë në si të gjenerojmë një rritje ekonomike në modelin, në kontekstin kosovar, duke pas parasysh nivelin e zhvillimit, tranzicionin e vështirë, duke pas parasysh sfidat që kemi tani. Në raportin që keni marrë dhe besoj keni marrë ma heret, por edhe sot e keni këtu në këto materiale, rrugtimi ekonomik ose Kosovo Economic Journey, ne jemi përpjekës bashku me kolegun Hashani, por edhe mendim edhe kolegëve tjerë, që të japëm një tablo, një pasqyrë të këtij problemi. Edhe mendoj se sot kemi një panel shumë të kvalifikuar, të cilët i falenderoj përzemërsisht që ne u kanë bashkuar në konferencë, që ti ndriçojmë disa aspekte, natyrisht duke pas pra në fokus si Kosova të gjenerojë një rritje, të avansojë modelin ekonomik, të ndryshojë modelin rritjes ekonomike, në mënyrë që të konvergjojmë ma me sukses drejt Unionit Ekonomik Evropian. Kosova ka pas një rritje ekonomike këtu vite, por ende mbetet thuajse në njëjtin nivel sa i përket konvergjimit me Bashkimin Evropian, edhe në nivel diku 70% të mesatarës e rajonit Ballkanit Perëndimor. Pas gjatur më shumë, unë kam kënaqësinë që t'i jap fjalën kolegut tonë të nderuar Mario Hozner nga Instituti Ekonomik i Vjenës. Po, falni po. Po. Ju kërkova falje që më bëna në ilshem këto. Këtë raport që është përgatitur si thash në institut, për me edhe Albanit, edhe mendimin e të kolegëve tjerë, do ta prezantoj diku brenda 15 minuta, besoj se jemi vënu pak. Kolegu Alban mandej do të vazhdojmë me këto.
Okay, I'll switch to English, and I promise this is the last time you'll see me today on this podium. I'll try to be brief to present what essentially is a collection of some of the research work that Riinvest has produced, certainly over the last couple of years, but also with the help of other available data, to talk about this Kosovo's economic path, and hopefully to set a scene for the discussions on the panel. Going back from a historical context, Kosovo essentially had Kosovo's path was marked with significant challenges. And certainly up until the late 1950s of the last century, Kosovo saw very limited economic transformation. And then a period of growth followed between certainly 1960s and 1988, driven primarily by economic and constitutional reform in Yugoslavia, when Kosovo consolidated its large territorial and political autonomy. This was reflected in the development of its physical and social infrastructure, industrialization, and improvement of the overall social fabric. At the start of the breakup of the federation, however, Kosovo per capita GDP was less than 1/3 of that of the federation's average. However, the 1990s were marked by severe setbacks. As you all know, its autonomous institutional independence was forcibly dismantled under Milosevic's regime, and this period was marked by significant deindustrialization and severe consequences of war. And the post-war recovery certainly was successful in creating basic infrastructure in the initial post-war period, but also in creating institutions almost from scratch. Yet, despite these developments, the growth rates were not very high, and also because the business environment was not very conducive. One of the reasons is that until 2016, custom tariff and value-added tax, which combined represented 26%, were collected at the border for capital goods and other inputs for manufacturing and services, coupled with high interest rates and significant infrastructural barriers, were not very conducive for private sector to flourish. And currently, Kosovo has a state of high middle income country. However, it's still below the Western Balkan countries' average, standing at around 65 to 70%, with some significant challenges that persist, among which the most important trade deficit, unemployment, and weak institutions. Now, in terms of global and regional context, the growth trends for 2025, in the latest IMF projections from April 2025, they indicate that global growth will reach 2.8%, which essentially is a downgrade of around 0.8 percentage points from the January forecast. And similarly, the McKinsey Global Survey from top executives of large companies worldwide, they also express increased caution, identifying geopolitical instability as the primary risk, alongside with the fact that almost half of the world will enter into a phase of new elections. And this situation will inevitably have its impact also on Western Balkan countries. Now, the economic growth projections for Western Balkans stand at 3.3 and 3.5% respectively for 2024 and 2025 and 26, sorry. And similar projections are made also for Turkey, which is an important trade partner for the region. Although the inflation has have declined, prices still remain higher than those pre-COVID, and especially certain goods are faced with higher inflation. Now, economic growth trends for Kosovo, after a slower period up until 2023, Kosovo in 24 returned to pre-COVID growth rates, which are at around 4%. The inflation has decreased. However, there are still inflationary pressures, especially since the last decision to increase electricity prices in regulated market by 16.1%. 1%. As far as businesses' sentiment are concerned, they expect that this year will be better than last year, but 2024 was rather worse than the previous year. And these are primary data that Riinvest collects as part of its efforts to monitor business environment. One of the major concerns relates to the trade balance of the country. So in parallel with economic growth, trade balance has also deteriorated, with the deficit increasing since 2019 by 65%, reaching 31.4% of GDP. And this is especially worrisome in deficit trade balance of goods, which increased by 74% during this period. There is some evidence that there is a diversification of export, which is a good news, especially in terms of goods. And just for illustration, we've produced this graph which summarizes it. Essentially, each dot represents 1 million value of exports, and different colors represent different product groups based on HS coding. So essentially, you see from 2015, the number of goods, types of goods of exports have increased quite significantly, which I think is an important factor. The service export is promising. It has doubled, and especially ICT services show strong international focus. The ICT barometer by the Association of ICT Sector suggested around 39% of companies cater exclusively for export markets, which is quite significant. However, when we talk about the exports of services, about 2/3 of those are services for diaspora, essentially money that they spend, like tourism export, when they are in the country. So essentially, because of the data collection process, they appear as export of services, though we are catering for our diaspora. Now, the remittances have kept their stable sort of percentage at around 15% of GDP, which demonstrate their importance and impact that they have in income structure of households, but also in boosting consumption, and they have a level of seasonality during summer. FDI have also increased as an important share of GDP over the last years. However, they primarily originate from our diaspora and are focused on real estate sector, which in itself creates potentially a non-tradable bias because they are focused on real estate, which by definition is a non-tradable sector. And the level of FDI on mining and manufacturing is, especially in manufacturing, is rather small and almost insignificant in a sense. The financial sector, dominated by commercial banks, continues to have trends of stability. Loans have been increased annually at around 15% on average, and they seem to have the same structure as the economy, essentially. Now, the government spending and public debt. Kosovo's overall public debt is small. However, there are problems also with executing the small amount of debt that we have. There are but there are certain cases that the loans that were taken as foreign debt, essentially we're servicing them but not executing the projects that are associated with those. As far as budget revenues and expenditures are concerned, they have increased following an upward trend. However, there are certain problems on our view. It has an atypical structure because it leans toward more and more towards subsidies and transfers at the expense of capital investment, even at the planning phase. And then there is a second layer of problems which relates to the execution of the planned capital investments. So the low level of execution of capital investments remains a challenge.
Now, one of the issues that we were discussing quite extensively, certainly in the last annual forum at Riinvest, was the efficiency of investment, both from public sector but also private sector. And what essentially we see is that the level of investments as share of GDP is quite significant. It's higher than the average of the region. So gross capital formation in Kosovo stands at more than 1/3, compared to around a 1/4 in the other Western Balkan countries. Certainly there is a need for better data when it comes to investments, but because there are certain discrepancies, but we try to extrapolate some of the data that we collect to try and fill this gap. But certainly the investment for public sector remains significant, similarly those from private sector, which has been increasing. And over the last several years, they're more than, at least in the last 5 years, they're more than doubles. However, the problem is with investment efficiency, even though it has a risk of oversimplifying, we've used the incremental capital output ratio to see where Kosovo stands vis-a-vis other countries. And just for illustration, essentially, this indicator is 4.26 in Kosovo and 2.2 in Serbia, which essentially mean we need twice as much investments to generate 1 unit of output of GDP in this case. And one of the major problems from the public sector side is both planning but also execution of capital investments. From the private sector companies, we've identified that they are not utilizing all their capacities, which stands around 60%. And the second problem is the technical structure of their investments. So based on our data, they seem to invest quite extensively on productive assets and mainly focus on investments on land, new buildings, so less on machinery, and certainly almost insignificant on research and development. However, there are some good trends and some good sort of prospects that companies are planning to invest more on research and development, almost doubling their level of investments as per their declarations. Now, one other topic, not to overrun time, but I'll try to be quick, relates to human capital and labor market dynamics. Most of you are sort of familiar with the problems that Kosovo has in terms of labor market. Essentially, one of the biggest problems remains the low participation rate, which is at 41%, far below regional countries, but also way below the EU average, which stands at 75%. And youth unemployment, even though it has improved, there are still some problems there. However, even though there are problems, high unemployment, businesses are still struggling, signaling a mismatch in the labor market. And some of this mismatch doesn't necessarily come from skills, but also expectations on working conditions, something that we've proved with some of the data that we collected. So in an effort to try and see what would be the typical company losing staff, the companies that have better working conditions seem to be more immune of losing staff. On the other hand, the problem of migration remains a big problem. Kosovo is one of the top countries in the Western Balkans for brain drain. Just for illustration, since the start of Berlin process, and certainly since 2016, when Germany made it easier for people from the region to go to Germany, Kosovo has lost annually 1% of population on legal visa permits. So that's a huge shock on our domestic labor supply. However, there are some important policy implications from the research we've come up with, certainly in improving job quality and working conditions, but also strengthening active labor market measures, which seem to be important determinants of keeping people in or lowering their incentive to leave. The one important element which sort of came about since the new census are demographic trends and their economic implications. Just briefly, Kosovo has lost 11% of its population from census of 2011 to the last census of last year, which is quite significant. And this is not, there is a lot of heterogeneity among different regions. Certainly regions that are in bordering with other countries and smaller municipalities have significantly lost population. And this has been shown in the increase of average age, which from just below 30 years of age now stands at almost 35 years of age. Fertility rate dropped from 2.5 to 1.5, which is similar to EU average, and the young population is declining, which is increasing the dependency ratio. Now, one of the theses that we were discussing quite often is this Kosovo's economic growth stuck in the middle income trap. So for certainly over the last decade and a half, Kosovo enjoyed a solid growth rate. However, unable to sort of change its position in terms of convergence, but also because it relied quite extensively on external factors, that in a way, this model has exhausted almost its power to transform the economy and has preserved the existing unfavorable structure of the economy. If you look at the composition of GDP, the share of manufacturing, since 15 years, it stands at around 12%. So it's not changing. That's the structure of the economy that we have. And essentially, we have insufficient investments for processing and export industry. And as was shown also with the data, insufficient investment on research and innovation, education and health, both from public funding, but also from private funding. Certainly there is a problem with low productivity and weak institutional governance. Now, the World Bank, and I hope some of the colleagues would reflect on that, are suggesting a strategy to overcome this middle income trap. So a typical country would essentially must increase investments, practically on human capital and sectors with export potential, then needs to adopt global technologies, and finally move, hopefully, to an innovation stage from imitation one. And one of the lessons that are quite important that we want to reaffirm is that based on the number of countries that were in this sort of trap, about a third escaped this trap by being in the process of joining the EU. So EU was an important vehicle to bring these countries out. So with the EU perspective sort of not very clear, I think it's a quite important element to go back to some of these aspects that I discussed that are important to escape this trap. And finally, I'll just briefly say a few words about Kosovo's institutional performance. Kosovo made significant progress, certainly in terms of improving business environment. What we've observed with our own data is that the structure of problems in the economy have shifted. So in terms of obstacles, from infrastructural problems being the most important ones after the war, they disappeared. So essentially, they're not very big problems. There are some problems in energy sector and so on, but not as significant as they were. However, there are still serious concerns related to contract enforcement and complex bureaucracies. Certainly, there were some important steps, especially the establishment of a commercial court, which aims to lower the backlog, but also the government program for prevention of administrative burden, which tries to make it easier for businesses to operate in the country. So institutional quality remains a challenge, especially in terms of rule of law and public administration. However, in some indicators and rankings, Kosovo scores either better or similar to regional countries. However, these problems are still there. Under pressure of time, I'll stop here and hopefully we'll have time to exchange. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alban, for your presentations. Now we go to pass the floor to the first panelist, Dr. Mario Hosner, Executive Director of Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, reference for policymakers and for researchers with their impressive production and contribution. Thank you, Mario, for your contribution. You have been inspiration also for our institute for years.
thank you very much. This is very, very kind words, and congratulations again for 30 years of exceptional work. I think, actually I would say Kosovo's economic development was actually fairly good given the circumstances. We shouldn't forget there is hardly any other country in Central East and Southeast Europe that has, let's call it, such constitutional problems with a major neighbor. There is Ukraine, obviously, to a certain extent Moldova and Bosnia. So given these extremely difficult circumstances, I think Kosovo did fairly well. Also, demographic dynamics were very different from other countries. So given all of this conundrum, the economic outcome wasn't too bad, and everyone who remembers how, for instance, Pristina looked like 20 years ago. I mean, this is a very different world today, and I think it's a better one in terms of socioeconomic development. However, as economists, we always have to find the problem and suggest maybe a potential solution in some kind of utopian, different world. So let me look at what I think is the major problem. There is a statistics I like to look at where Kosovo, unfortunately, is leading the statistic. It's not a good statistic. It's if you look at the share of urban population consumption in terms of consumption items that you really need, like housing, energy, transport, education, and health expenditures. So these are expenditures that also the public policies can impact, but that everyone needs to spend on. It's not something we have a lot of choice about. And if you relate that expenditure items to the expenditure items of what one could say are the expenditures for the good life, like restaurants, hotel, recreation, sports, culture, personal services. That's where in this relationship Kosovo fares the worst in all of Europe. So people have predominantly to have expenditures in those things that just help to basically keep up basic life. I'm speaking about urban areas. So I think that is the fundamental problem, and typically housing is the biggest item. Costs for housing are some of the biggest items in those consumption patterns of things that we really need. I think it would make sense to learn from the best, and the most competitive countries on this country on this planet is a city-state, Singapore. Why not? Why shouldn't Kosovo become the Singapore of the Western Balkans? And little it is known that at the heart of the Singaporean economic system and miracle, because Singapore used to be an extremely poor country several decades ago, at the heart of this system is a public housing program where 80% of Singaporeans live in housing that was built top quality by the Singaporean government. People can't buy in a sense of permanently housing, but it is a 99-year lease, and there are all kinds of support schemes. Singapore has a lot of other, I think, very interesting programs also in healthcare and in transport and what have you, but I think the housing issue is central. And in this very interesting publication that you have presented right now, there is also an indication how important the construction sector is in Kosovo, and at the same time, so both in terms of GDP but also in terms of FDI, but at the same time that it contributes so little to productivity gains. It's an extremely unproductive sector, and I have the feeling that it's almost a a remaining element of the Yugoslav economy where there were no finished products in the Yugoslav economy. Every household had to be also a construction company, had to be a car repair company, you know, everyone had to do something about things where actually we need specialists who perform most efficiently. So I think looking at what and how Singapore does, for instance, the whole housing program would be really important, and primarily for the young people. Every youngsters in Singapore who want to establish an own household, they are priority by the housing board. And I think that would also help to reduce the mass immigration of young people that should eventually become those who, for instance, in the nascent IT services, but also other services and also in exports which are starting to pick up, they should be those who innovate, who have new ideas, and maybe then also FDI and remittances can be channeled into more productive areas if you once solved the housing problem. So let me stop here at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, very much for your insights and comments. Now we move to pass the floor to Professor Jeff Yu, an emeritus professor from Staffordshire University. He has his students here and many other students over there. So, and he has been working with Riinvest in several projects. Professor Pugh is Emeritus Professor of Economics, and he has managed many important projects. Now is also member of Evaluation Trial Advice Panel at the UK Government Prime Minister Office. Jeff, please.
Thank you. Well, first, congratulations to the authors of this report. It's comprehensive. It reflects perhaps 30 years of engagement and thinking at a very high level in very difficult circumstances. So, I mean, my response is obviously limited. I want to make some general reflections and then conclude with some specific but very modest recommendations, particularly regarding the use and development of human capital. You know, I think that'll be, a theme of, well, not just the report and Alban's presentation, but I suspect also from, from the panel. I'll start off by saying a few words about the catch-up hypothesis in economic development. Now, independent Kosovo inherited really truly dreadful initial conditions. However, potentially there is an advantage of starting out behind. You know, if you're far behind, then there is at least a potential for rapid catch-up. But if and only if the conditions for catch-up are present. And this is all to do with absorptive capacity, the ability to adopt ideas from wherever they might come, from other regions, other countries. We've had the brilliant example of Singapore, which in 1960, newly independent from the British Empire, was very poor. And now I believe its per capita income is above that of Britain, the former colonial power. You know, there's much to learn. Now, you might not emulate the economy. Maybe, I don't know enough about it. But certainly the way in which Singapore eliminated corruption, that's well worth a look at. So the ability to adopt absorptive capacity then, key concept, ability to adopt policies, but also, of course, to adapt them to your own purposes, adapt them to your own circumstances. You know, and this needs to occur on two levels. I mean, one is the institutional foundations of a developed market economy, rule of law, governance standards, macroeconomic stability, and so forth. But also the ability to engage in rapid catch-up, to move from being very far behind towards the frontiers, requires inward knowledge transfer and investment. Investment to embody new ideas and techniques. So inward transfer of capital, both tangible and intangible, development of labour, human capital, and I would say above all technical progress, which comes from innovation. Well, no great surprises here. I mean, according to mainstream economics, these are the drivers, the ultimate drivers, the high-level drivers of productivity. Capital, labour, technical progress. So a few words on productivity and innovation. There are two ways to make an economy grow, ultimately. You can either have more labour, or you can have, or more output per worker. Labour productivity and living standards move roughly in lockstep. They're almost definitionally equal. Output per worker, output per head of population. They're not quite the same, but they're very, very similar. So, how to raise more productivity. Now, adding more workers or adding more capital ultimately meets the barriers of diminishing returns. I mean, ultimately, I think that's what ruined the Soviet economy. They constituted a perfectly formed Victorian factory economy. But if you add more workers and/or capital in the context of innovation, that's where you can have permanent growth. So over time, I think labour productivity, living standards depends mainly on innovation. Process innovation, producing existing products more cheaply. That can come from raising the capital-labour ratio, but is ultimately limited, as I said, as a source of growth. But I think above all, product innovation, introducing new products. I mean, the West, the developed market economies, became rich not by ever more efficient production of the economies of 1800, but by introducing, bit by bit, literally millions of new, unprecedented, and indeed unthought of products. So over the long term, since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, since about 1800, it's product innovation, I think, that has raised people from pretty much universal $3 a day poverty, towards the level of enrichment that we now enjoy. Trade, of course, is also a multiplier of wealth, of betterment, of enrichment. But of course, trade occurs at the intensive margin, exporting more of existing stuff, but even more important, it occurs at the extensive margin, exporting new products. And these new products are, of course, the ones with the highest value added. And yet, and here I'm going to quote the report, there are barriers to innovation, raising productivity, currently existing in Kosovo. Here I quote the report. The competitive environment does not sufficiently encourage innovation, nor does it support the creation and absorption of new knowledge and technologies. I think that is the point of attack. So, next thing I want to comment on is that these productivity drivers, capital, labour, technical progress, they're all hugely influenced by human capital. Maybe not just by human capital, but I would certainly argue mainly by human capital. Think of capital productivity that Alban commented on, and that's detailed in the report. The problem is quality of investment, not the volume. It's the quality of investment and its use. The problem is that productivity is not increasing in line with the volume of fixed capital. Well, why not? The report suggests several reasons. I quote, lagging rate of technical progress, quality of the organizational structure, professional and managerial skills, workforce skills. Now, these reasons for lagging capital productivity actually are all to do with deficiencies in human capital, which limit the efficiency with which capital can be used. So capital productivity, I think, reflects, lagging capital productivity reflects lagging or deficiencies in human capital development. And we turn to labour itself, to human capital directly. The report documents a skills gap. Quote, difficulties in finding workers with the necessary skills. Expenditure for education and science, which is anticipated for 2025, 3.5% of GDP, which is below the European average of 4.7% of GDP. So, if you're going to engage in catch-up, you need a higher proportion, not a lower proportion. Now, according to the report then, quote, insufficient quality of human capital is an obstacle to catch-up. Absolutely right, in my view. Quote, this limits firms' ability to invest and adopt new technologies, attract capital and expertise from abroad and innovate. In other words, this is the obstacle to all those things you need to engage in catch-up. Thirdly, then, the third driver of productivity, technical progress, innovation. Now, this can be, transformative, new platforms, steam power, electricity, the internet, and so on, the fourth industrial revolution, all that kind of stuff. Okay, it can be radical, new to the market, or incremental. Most entrepreneurship, most innovation is incremental. It's new to a firm, but the firm doesn't necessarily invent it. Now, and again, incremental innovation depends on absorptive capacity, which reflects research and development and open innovation, the ability to search for, adopt and adapt ideas from elsewhere. Research and development is important, but that's only, and again, we got this from the report, only 0.16% of GDP, very, very low. And yet all these activities depend on human capital. In empirical studies, R&D is quite difficult to measure. It's generally proxied by the number of employees active in research and development. So all these things, capital productivity, the quality of the labour force, and above all, innovation, all of these things are driven by human capital. Now, next point, it's not all bad news. I think one fantastic part of the report was a potential shown by the growth Christ, I'm having a senior moment. This is embarrassing. Information technology. Yes, that's right, IT, information technology. I couldn't remember what it stood for, which is bizarre seeing I'm involved in a project on the development of information technology in my own university town. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Now, the possible reasons for this growth of IT. Now, here I'm guessing. This is not from a report, so it's guesswork. Okay, why is IT growing? And it's also growing in my home university town, which is a poster child for deindustrialization in developed market economies. I think three reasons. One is that IT is less inhibited than other sectors by institutional and governance weaknesses. You do not need permission to write a software program. You need permission to build a factory. You don't need permission to develop a software platform. Secondly, I think IT is less inhibited by the limitations of national markets. Good software can be scaled globally to be applied anywhere. And finally, I think, there might be other reasons, but I've picked out three. Fixed or tangible capital requirements can be quite modest. The development, for example, of cloud computing, pay-as-you-use, means that to develop IT capacity, you don't need the whole panoply of servers and stuff like that you might have needed 10 or 15 years ago. IT is much more dependent on intangible capital. And what's intangible capital? Cognitive skills, training, research and development, intellectual property. It's all to do with human capital. So this is instructive. The cost of an economy looks to me like it's had most success in the sector most dependent on human capital. And that's great. You have a lot of highly educated, energetic and ambitious young people. Now, IT is also a sector of strategic importance. It raises productivity when applied to other sectors. Think of manufacturing. You know, you can have very old lathes and industrial equipment, couple that with digital control systems, and you can be at the cutting edge of manufacturing. It's quite common. I mean, I've seen this in my own area. You know, very old machines, 40, 50, 60 years old, but with digital control systems. And also, in the increasingly important creative sector of the economy. Now, IT is itself a creative sector, but IT transforms traditional content. I mean, my favourite example, I live in Stratford-upon-Avon, the birthplace of Shakespeare, home of the Royal Shakespeare Company. Now, that's a theatre that has an R&D department. You think, why? You know, but when you see one of their performances, they've actually integrated traditional theatre arts with techniques from cinema, and it's all to do with the application of IT. It's all very clever. You know, and yet, you see, I think Kosovo is not yet sufficiently building on this success. You know, the report, again, quote, refers to insufficient financing of education, healthcare, scientific research, and innovation. So my final slide really is just to do with, you know, now, you know, it's all very general, very broad. This is very specific and very modest. You know, it's to do with the use and development of human capital. So I've got three modest recommendations. The first is, obviously, you've got to recognize resource constraints. It would be nice to mobilize billions of dollars to immediately transform or short-term transform education, training, healthcare, all those constituent parts of human capital development. But, I mean, it's got to be done within resource constraints. Now, when one thinks about what influences productivity, well, the short answer is everything. You know, think about human capital. You know, once you start thinking about human capital, it takes you to education, training, healthcare, social policy, culture, you know, your history, your norms, your values. Okay, let's just focus on the education part of that. Well, that in turn resolves to schools, colleges, higher education institutions. Let's focus on higher education institutions. Well, that resolves into programs, curricula, etc. So I'm going to start at that level. You know, what can universities do? You know, I mean, a lot of us here are involved in higher education. Now, one suggestion I'm going to put forward comes from my own recent experience in Stoke-on-Trent, and it's a suggestion in the spirit of the triple helix concept. You know, the interaction or interface between higher education institutions, business, and government. Now, it doesn't come from my work. It comes from, you know, most of my ideas come from my PhD students. You know, I've been supervising a PhD recently that's written by someone who is evaluating, as part of the university management, and academics do sometimes talk to managers. It doesn't often happen, but, you know, in this case. The PhD is an evaluation of student placements with local small and medium-sized firms. These are final year undergraduate, not research students, note. These are final year undergraduate students or taught master's students in computing, engineering, design, and some in business. They are 3 or 6 month part-time placements to work on a distinct and well-defined innovation project, and they're financed by local government. And they're very cheap programs compared to any other form of business support that I know of. Now, the outcomes so far have been very encouraging. Not all successful, but most have been successful. And typically, they're bringing forward the introduction of new products at low cost. And we all know that speed to market for small and medium-sized firms is crucial. They tend not to use patenting or trademarks, but speed to market is the way they maintain a competitive edge. Now, there are lots of examples of new products being introduced and, in some cases, process improvements. I'll just give one example because I'm probably running out of time. I'll give I have. I've run out of time. Well, okay. I won't give the examples, which is a pity because some of them. But you'll just have to, Now, this is good for SME innovation, but it's also good for developing the human capital of the students. So, so I think, raising productivity resolves to really 1,001 improvements throughout the whole system. I mean, this is one potential improvement. And when you introduce an improvement, evaluate it. What works? Is it value for money? And finally, back to policy transfer. Look for examples of good practice. This was suggested by Justin Lin when he was chief economist at the World Bank. Learn from experience of countries that are, if you like, one step ahead of you. Countries that you can emulate. And, if you make 1,001 improvements all around the economy, continuously evaluate them, then there's a good chance that the resulting system, will give you something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for putting your accent on increasing quality of the human capital and way how we can do it and how we can more effectively use our human resources. It's a key how we can advance our quality of our economic growth and to go from the steady economic growth to kind of transformative economic growth as Kosovo needs very much. So we move forward to our next distinguished panelist, Shqiponia Telhaj, is a professor of economics. His special interests are economics of education, and Professor Telhaj is providing a very, very high contribution to improving quality of education in Albania. I think we will learn from there something.
Okay,
the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
She is head of accreditation agency in Albania for higher education institutions.
I'm just on the board, not the agency. But anyway, so first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me today. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this panel. I find it a bit odd to speak in English because I'm Albanian. So, but of course, I'll continue my reflection on the report, which I thought was excellent. And being a labor and education economist, an academic, and I think Jeff stole some of my discussion in a way, in inverted commas, and also being Albanian, I think it gives me also a lot of information that I can share or discuss, which I think might be very useful, knowing also the education system, which Albania and Kosovo, I think, have it very similar. So this is why my talk is going to be brief, to stay within the time, and I'm going to focus on three important pillars, I think, because when we discuss about economic growth, and Kosovo has made huge progress, as colleagues said, in terms of increasing economic growth, but of course now the model maybe needs to be renewed and a new model of economic growth is needed, given that, as the report says, that the growth has kept kind of at bay at around 4%. So what is needed? Of course, we all know that education is the cradle of economic growth for every country. And I remember when I was a student, I remember Tony Blair said in the UK, I think one of their slogans was education, education, and education. And me as a student, maybe naive at the time, thinking like, what are they thinking about? I mean, education, UK, you know, they lead education, so what else do they want? And then now we have Rishi Sunak, like before, of course, he resigned as a prime minister, recently was discussing about the importance of bringing mathematics back to schools. So what we did in Albania, and I wouldn't like to talk about Kosovo because I don't have much information, but in Albania, when they were going through transition, when we kicked out communism, what we did is we looked to the West. So we said, fine, well, let's just do how education is done in the UK. And UK was an example. So what we did, we basically decided to teach less maths. And really, I think what we had as a legacy of communism, and maybe from the Soviet Union, was that Albania had really very strong mathematics background or sciences background. So that kind of went a little bit down, and of course you're not, in the sense that they're not really learning much of the sciences. And now in 2024, then you see the UK would like to introduce more maths in schooling. So basically, while we completed following the UK now is going back to mathematics. So I don't know what we need to do now. But I think, of course, mathematics is very important when we discuss about education. So that's why I brought the British example, because obviously I've been based there for a long time now, to say that improvement in education is not really very important for transition countries like Kosovo and Albania, but it's for everywhere, especially with the new changes in technology, and education is really important. Now we also need to adjust. So that's why, very briefly, I'd like to discuss about how education, of course, being a labor economist, and what I saw in the report, another issue is, of course, labor market participation, and of course, migration that my colleagues discussed a bit briefly, but I also do studies on migration, so I'll spend a few minutes on that as well. So let me start with education. Jeff did point out, and Alban as well in his introduction and summary of the report, is that Kosovo, in terms of spending on education, spends less than other countries, and it's around 3.5% of the GDP, and that is obviously lower than the European Union, which is around 4.7%. In addition to that, if we really want to improve growth, of course, investment in R&D, research and development spending is really important. And on that, I think, if I remember the figure correctly, it was planned for Kosovo around 0.37% of the GDP, which is really low if you would like to compare it with the average of the European Union, which is around 2.2, and I think that's France level, but of course other countries, especially Northern European countries, have a much higher level. So these two are important. So it's not only, we always talk about expenditure. Of course, I work a lot on education. It's not only spending, the quantity of spending, but it's also the quantity of it. Like, how do you really spend that money? Because usually there is a correlation between how much you spend on education and how much education really helps in economic growth. But correlation is not causation, as we know. So even if we spend less, but if we target it efficiently, I think that's important. And another issue we have in terms of education, I think, which I saw in the report, and I would like to also thank Riinvest for a lot of surveys that they carry out, because they give you a lot of information, because you not only need what really are the problems, but also to find how we really in details, because if we know problems in details, for example, asking employers, so they see a mismatch, for example, in terms of skills that graduates get, and the needs in the labor market. And we see that in Albania as well. We see that being part of this, as I said, to check, to see how the higher education works in Albania. Of course, it has quite a lot of problems, some achievements as well, of course, but you see as well that there's a detachment with the needs of the labor market. So you learn a lot, but then the graduates are disconnected to the economy. So in a way, what does it mean? That you need to retrain them, and you need some kind of policies in terms of on-the-job training and so on, which is costly. So that's another problem that you see in terms of you might need more that industry and universities partnership in order for them to basically, we have these graduated cohorts, but I mean, how much they can affect growth. So that's this mismatch of skills and what the market needs, labor market, I think it's an issue. The other thing that I saw in the report that really struck me was the young people that are in need, not in employment, education, and training. And that was 1 in 3. So this is also a loss in human capital that it's really important, that needs to be addressed. So these 3 issues, I think this is really is important to be addressed. And of course, I agree with both of colleagues' comments in saying that we should try and emulate or try to learn from what other economies have done. But as an Albanian, and also having worked a little bit in Albania, and knowing, of course, Kosovo as well, a bit in terms of the structure of the economy, I don't think it's enough that we really do what other countries have done, because we really have to take into account our country's characteristics. And it's not something that works I don't know, let's say even in Czech Republic, for example, does not necessarily would work very well in Albania or in Kosovo. So that's why they are really good suggestions, I think, but we also need to take into account how much they might fit with what we have in terms of human capital, but also other characteristics of our economy, but also culture and social norms do matter here a great deal. Then very briefly, I would like to say a few points in terms of labor market participation. It's really, if you look at the statistics, I mean, the unemployment has gone down, as Alban said. But then there are some, this figure hides some details. One of them is that Kosovo, it seems to have around only 30% of people are in employment. So this is very low, maybe one of the lowest in Europe. And else what we also see is that female participation in the labor market is less than 20%, and this is clearly the lowest in Europe. And there are some structural barriers, of course, for women, and this is, I mean, what I'd like to say, there is this gap. So this is not only that we worry about this gender inequality, right? But we also worry about that if we are talking about growth, females are 50% of the basically workforce. And we really need to find ways to engage them with the labor market. I mean, there are some structural barriers, of course, and that structural barriers might be, of course, this very costly, the child care might be costly, the elderly care, the flexibility for women to participate in the labor market. So these structural barriers need to be addressed by the government in order to make sure we need them, basically their contribution. And this is something that I'm going to talk tomorrow as well. There's a paper that I'm going to present, but this is of female participation in Albania in the labor market. But that's a different part and how communist government at the time tried to change social norms. I'm definitely not going to suggest what I find in the paper, but what I would like to say that we have a role, and social norms, although they often are thought sticky and permanent, but they are possible to change, and they can change even overnight if we find the right tools to address them. And the last bit that I wanted to discuss, and also, of course, active labor policies are very important to try and bring young people, but also women, more in the labor market in order to really help to improve this economic growth in a speedier way, as we discussed. And the last bit, and I think this is the more painful one, is migration. I'm not the one to really give lessons about migration and diaspora coming back. I mean, I can't say to anyone, please come back, because I left myself. But okay, I always have an argument to my friends.
You are coming.
Exactly.
Often, yeah.
So now I have, but of course, coming back to the Balkans, it has its own issues, which I don't want to discuss here, but it's also good to come back to provide for your country. Also, it can be costly as well. But what I'd like to say is that Kosovo, as well as Albania, but this is a Balkan thing, and it's even a South European problem, is that half of the population of Kosovo is basically has left. And I meet in London, for example, I have a few friends, and they are great Kosovo academics, and they are engineers, they work like at King's College, in really great institutions. But I don't know, I mean, they haven't mentioned, but I don't know if they come back enough. And the thing is, this is basically this is human capital depletion. We are saying that human capital really matters if we want to improve growth. I mean, it's the cradle of economic growth, and we need people, right? And the way we need to do this, I think, is trying to find a way we can't, I mean, migration is not necessarily a bad thing. And we discuss with Gerard sometimes, and he says, no, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to manage it. And we need to find a way how to bring diaspora back. And this does not have to be permanently, but for example, if you want the industry and universities partnerships, then we can get academics that are abroad. And I gave also a talk, I prepared a report in Albania, and I think we have similar issues, I mean. And what a problem they have there is as well that they have to find a way, especially in higher education, to bring diaspora back, and also to make sure that what universities need, really, the research and development is done at the universities, right? So the government should find a way to make sure that we have this, the diaspora comes back, not necessarily full-time, but also try and use different policies. I mean, Italy has an interesting example, I think, which we're talking that we can learn from other countries, but also include our own characteristics to make them more efficient. Italy, for example, has cut taxes, and I have quite a few of my co-authors and friends, and especially those who don't have a family, because when you have kids and so on, it becomes more difficult. But they have gone back to Italy, but they don't pay taxes, and they have a guaranteed payment and salary rise, I think, for a long time. Albania, I think, applied it a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and so on. Quite a lot of people came back, but then the economic situation kind of deteriorated, so I don't know how that lasted. So in a way, what I'd like to say that diaspora is great, they bring remittances we discussed, but remittances do not guarantee a long-term growth. So we need to find a way to engage them much more, maybe temporarily, maybe in order to cooperate, to write, I don't know, studies that can help the further development of the country. So there are a lot of things that we can discuss, and I would like to stop here because I don't want to take any more time. But these are, I think, the education, labor force participation, and migration policies here, I think, especially to improve human capital and make sure to engage diaspora back in the country that can really help and give, I think, a kick to the economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Delhaj, Professor Sciponia. I think it's very important here in Kosovo to understand that we have always and permanently increased investment in human capital, but also ensure all conditions to have returns on that investment. That's the key, I think, from your and Jeff's message, and also Mario. So we have some 15 minutes for questions and short comments. Because I will use some 5 minutes from the break, Alban, because we started late. Yeah. So okay. Please, pyetje të shkurta ju lutem, nëse keni ndonjë pyetje, sugjestion ose koment të shkurt, por kisha dashur që të bëni ndonjë pyetje për panelistat tanë të nderuar. Urdhoni, ka dikush një pyetje? Bujar Pira, Program Director of Riinvest.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed. It is a question, though, combined with a comment. We always refer to education as spending in education, rather than investing in education. So if we probably switch our mindset from spending, because spending is something you always look to cut and reduce, and investing you always look for increasing. Would you think that would have any change in the mindset and probably affect the outcome?
Okay, thank you. Shall we get all questions and then we comment? Any other question, please? Or short comment? No? Then who would like to take this question?
I can.
Okay.
Or
Sciponia.
Ledger.
Well, you can both. You can both shortly comment. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just. This is a very good question, actually. So, would you like to think it as spending or investing in education? And I'd like to say it's investing. Of course, it's much more important. It's much more broader, because research has found that spending does not necessarily improve education. Because the thing is, as I briefly said, is that you can spend less and you can still achieve more in terms of improving education. And the key here is to spend efficiently. So you know, to target spending where it's needed and where it much more increases human capital. And this is why it's important, I think, because money does not necessarily mean more. And investing in education means it's much broader in the sense, because you'd like to have a much brighter and more prepared, let's say, young people for the labor market, so they can, in a way, help to increase economic growth. And then you invest, of course, you invest not only spend more, but invest in skills, and also invest in infrastructure, for example, that the government can invest, and also invest to make sure that it's not only education itself, but it's also everything that surrounds it that makes it really important. So I'd just say, yeah, investing is probably the better word for it. Yeah, thank you.
Likewise, investment, absolutely. And like any investment, we want to know the rate of return, don't we? You know, which means it needs evaluation. So, I would say that if a university spends money on recarpeting the Vice-Chancellor's office, I would say let's evaluate that. What does it contribute to university productivity as against, say, hiring a bright new research assistant? You know, I think that's right. I mean, it's interesting that, I mean, I was using the language of spending as well, but yeah, what we really are talking about is investment in education, investment in human capital. And but just, I mentioned, this small, modest idea of student placements. Well, the interesting thing about the PhD that's being done is that it's being rigorously evaluated. You know, what actually are the returns, whether financial or in terms of, non-financial measurement, like, physical improvements in managing data that have been brought about by some of our student placements. You know, that kind of, if you talk the language of investment, then I think you talk the language of rates of return and rigorous evaluation as well. I think the two go together.
Thank you. Jeff, any other question or comment, or we can, yeah, please.
Maybe I can speak loudly.
Probably, okay. So more.
They may need it for translation.
Can you be more efficient in bringing mics?
Thank you very much. My name is Rudina Albani. I'm from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. Congratulations on the 30 years. And my question is related to geopolitical settings in the recent months. We've seen in Kosovo especially a significant effect of reducement of international funds coming from abroad, and having in mind how these funds helped especially in gender programs with vulnerable groups as well. My concern is how this will affect the women's employment in the future as well, having in mind the low women participation in the labor market overall. In small countries like Kosovo, this could have a very large effect. And what can a country like ours do to alleviate the potential effects in the future, negative effects, in the civil society, government, from the government as well, and especially a current political crisis, I would say, so to speak, that also is not helping to this effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mario, would you take that?
I think there is a big role for Friedrich Ebert Stiftung to take up, and others who still are engaged in this point. I would maybe, so this is absolutely an issue of high importance. I would maybe take the broader geopolitical, geoeconomic issue up, and maybe also comment on your very correct expression of doubt that it is easy to simulate, for instance, Singapore's institutional setup, which is true. It's extremely difficult to emulate or develop new institutions, although I think it's also very important. So let me maybe also in these two areas make a more down-to-earth suggestion, and also thinking about what was so far in Central, East and Southeast Europe the main economic model. It was basically FDI driven. When did FDI enter a market, small or big? It was basically when it was clear that the country would join NATO. So there is an enormous security issue about foreign direct investment. If you are an investor, you obviously want to be sure that you won't end up in a war zone. So those countries who do not have this security promise have a problem. Now what to do? NATO in itself became a questionable system. We don't know whether Article 5 in reality will be, unfortunately, a colleague from the United States left already, will be really a promise we can build on. So an alternative would be to create own security powers. I think the recent signing of a military partnership agreement between Kosovo, Albania and Croatia, and if I understand correctly also Bulgaria is interested to join, is of utmost importance. I think intensifying this over the years is very important. Increasing Kosovo's capacities to defend itself is also important. In that respect, I think it's also possible to connect it with an industrialization program where, for instance, a dual-use drone industry could be developed in Kosovo. If Ukraine can do it, I think Kosovo can do it as well.
Yeah. Okay. Alban.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Thank you for all your support, and special greeting to Professor Jeff Pugh and Shiponia. It's really good to see them again in Pristina. Just two short comments on education, investment in education, and on what Alban raised, the issue of low level of capital investments, execution. When I see the issue of investment in education from the budget point of view, I see that most of spending from the structure of investment goes in wages and salaries. I'm speaking for the public sector. So I think it's very much important when we talk about increasing investment in education to speak about providing more equipment, more knowledge in order to increase the capacities. And second, the issue of low level of execution of capital investments. It's true, last year was 77%. In 2023 was around 60%. This year is trend promising. But one of the issues from the budget point of view where I see problem is that many projects become part of the budget, unmatured projects, because there are less investments in preliminary analysis, expropriation issues, legal issues. So when the projects become part of the budget, they have no problem in starting execution. So I think this is very important for the institutions to make prior investments, prior analysis, prior studies. So when they become part of the budget, then the execution become more smoothly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salvador. Alban?
I just wanted to comment on the issue of cutting off funding, especially from U.S. and it's not just U.S. A lot of reorientation of funding is going to defense in a lot of either multilateral or bilateral donors, and that is also impacting the research funding in the country. Some of important donors in the region have took the route of strategically cutting funding, like the Swiss. They've now don't program for Albania any longer. But in the coming years, things may change. And I think this is very important for EU to step up, because there are a lot of things that have been created and can essentially just go to hell if there is no one to maintain them. Because what we've observed, and I think is important, especially after the cutting of funding from the US, that was used also as a mechanism to erode some of democratic values in the Western Balkans. So I think it is important that both the EU but also governments step up in creating conditions for this emerging infrastructure of research and innovation, but also civil society sector to survive, so to say.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Alban. I think, do you have anything to add? Coffee, okay. We need coffee. It seems we need coffee, so we have to wrap up. And I thank you very much, panelists. I thank you very much for your questions and comments. Now, I think it's very important what was pointed out here, because if you look at figures, how much we invest in research and research and development, how much we invest in education, how much we invest in health, I think we should not be surprised that we have so much immigration outside. And this is key, and Kosovo must understand this and should raise its ambition for more prosperous, transformative economic growth and to change its model. We were motivated to put very much accent on model that also put accent in the supply side elements, and we were motivated especially by the study that you did with Bruegel and with Stockholm Institute of Economics 2010, I think. But I think that study was not properly used by policymakers and researchers too. Lately, yes, because it's a more research about middle income trap and other things. I think World Bank has put its accent to this problem of middle income trap. We try to look at it from a Kosovo perspective. I think there are serious issues, but invest in people, invest in education, and ensure all conditions to return that investment, to use that investment for prosperity. Thank you very much.